thank you everybody for joining us today for this Americas meeting during Climate Action Week. I'm glad to be here with a whole group of volunteers that is helping to run today's session. Thank you, Zach, thank you, Ine, thank you, Claire, thank you, Anna, for joining us here today. So not sure exactly if everybody here is acquainted with CANIE, so we're going to start with just a brief introduction on CANIE. So CANIE was founded in late 2019 with the first event in 2020, and it's basically a volunteer-run organization where we are with the vision of reaching net zero for the international education sector by 2030. And our job here, even though we are volunteers, our role is to advocate for climate action within the international education sector. And we're also networked. The N in CANIE, it's basically the network part, because we want to connect and we want to collaborate among practitioners to lead the industry, to lead the sector into focusing to fight climate change. We're glad to have received last year the EAA President's Award on the work that CANIE has been doing through the past. It's a young organization, as I said, volunteer run, but we have a wide reach to 750 institutions around the world. If you want to, we'll be providing more information later on how you can join other working groups and other sessions at CANIE, but during Climate Action Week, we still have 2 days to go, and we have more events coming up tomorrow and on Friday. So you should definitely visit CANIE's website with all the events that that we are taking here during Climate Action Week, thanks to Mewish here organizing the whole sessions. And last but not least, very important, a big thank you to our sponsor for this Climate Action Week, which is Alethea Global Cooperative. And we're glad to have here CJ representing today Alethea, even though she's also a member of the CANIE Americas chapter. And basically, Alethea can help you with decarbonized international education with different services from professional development to policy writing and so on. So thank you again, Alethea, for sponsoring the Climate Action Week and also being a CANIE Accord signer, signatory, within. We'll talk a little bit about that later if you're not aware what the CANIE Accord is. So I'm Sebastian Fernandez. I'm right now the president of the Americas chapter based in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And we have open positions for the Americas chapter for leadership. So if you want to join me in doing more within the Americas, and I will greatly appreciate your help. We have open positions for both vice president and secretary of this chapter. So if you're interested, please reach out to us at americas@canie.org, and there we'll be able to direct you in the right way to submit your application to our leadership team and then join CANIE Americas chapter as a leader. Then talking about the chapter, we also have a Padlet. You have the link right there where we simply share who we are, and you can get to know everybody at the chapter a little bit better. Basically who we are, where we come from, where we have experience in international education, and also within climate action. That's what's bringing us together here. And we continue on with the CANIE working groups, which basically is the different ways you can get involved with CANIE. The way that CANIE is structured among the chapters is, apart from the chapters, we have different working groups that are collaborative between different chapters, where we advance things and we take things on a different level to get things done. And here I would like to introduce you to CJ Tremblay, who is going to give us a little bit more info about some of the working groups, and also to my colleague Ine here. Sorry, Ine, I forgot to mention you when I mentioned volunteers. You're like a friend of the house. CJ, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you so much, Sebastian. Thanks for having me here. As Sebastian mentioned, I am an active volunteer member of CANIE. I'm one of the founding members, and currently am the volunteer vice chair of the board and active member of multiple working groups. And I think one of the best parts about CANIE is that there are so many opportunities to channel your energy to want to be involved. And while you're involved and working on things, we're all learning so much about what we're doing and from each other. And I think that these working groups are a great way to sort of set foot into CANIE if you don't want to jump into the chapter leadership position, even though I mentioned in the chat, like 12-10 recommend. Being in a leadership position in a chapter or the board is a lot of fun and a great opportunity to like learn and influence action. So I'll talk very briefly about the Marketing and Communications Working Group and the podcast production team. The Marketing and Communications Working Group is basically a group that supports really the nerve center of our work at CANIE, which is our website. It's sort of our source of truth and where a lot of critical information sits, whether it's general information about CANIE, chapter pages, the CANIE Accord and our signatories, which are like a critical program for CANIE. It's also an opportunity because everyone is doing so much stuff. There's a tremendous connectivity between the comms group and other working groups, other chapters, other boards. So it's a really great opportunity. And while we're certainly not asking anyone to be a professional coder, if you can use a Word document, you can probably work out working on the website. And then there's also working with social media and all those different elements. So pretty much if you can write an email in Word or write in Word, there is sort of space and capacity and a need, because this is a working group that serves the entire sort of fundamental foundation of CANIE and all of the stuff that we do. And on the podcast production side, if anyone has heard or listened to or been a part of, we had a live CANIE recording earlier this week of the podcast. Is the CANIE Climate Dialogues podcast. And the podcast is really important because it is a platform that we use not only to share information with people, but it's also, you'll hear us keep talking about this, but it's also a way for CANIE to bring in revenue with our sponsors. Our sponsors are super important because, as we mentioned before, and as we keep mentioning and we'll continue to mention, CANIE is a volunteer-run organization. And so having various channels that allow us to bring in sponsors is really important to the work that we do. Also, the podcast is super fun. And if you don't want to be on the podcast as a host or whatever, there's still so much opportunity to brainstorm ideas, seek out guests to be on the podcast, create sort of narrative flows of an episode. And the team that's currently working on that is awesome. And so if that's something that you might be interested, again, I'd encourage you to, anything here that is of interest to you, you'll want to like reach out to the email that you see on the screen and that is in the chat, which is americas@canie.org. Currently, Sebastian will be able to channel you to the right person. And so the Marketing and Comms Working Group and the Podcast Production Team are two groups that are actively looking for continued members so that we can, and they're a great way to get started. And now, Ine, I'm the one who went first, so you get to follow that to tell us all about the, usually have to follow Ine, and it's so hard to follow Ine, so I'm glad I got to like start first. So please go ahead and share sort of the other two working groups.
I love being able to follow after you because you set the stage. It's so great. I just want to start out by just echoing some of what CJ's just said, and that is there's all these great opportunities to get involved and also be part of leadership, even if you're not sure. So most of all of us here, when we got started with CANIE, we were like, oh, I don't know how to do this, or I'm not sure about this. And we got to learn together. So if there's something you're interested in and you're just kind of telling yourself, I don't know, maybe come talk to one of us about it if you're not sure. So that way you can kind of make the decision and feel more confident about what you're doing. But you do not have to be an expert in anything to get involved with any of these. You just have to have an interest and have some time to be able to get involved. With that, I'm going to be talking about content and climate justice, but to let you know a little bit about who I am, I've been in the international education field for about 17 years now, working mostly with study abroad and international student scholar services. Right now, I'm in the middle of the desert in the nowhere, off grid, and working on developing my own business that's related to international education and academic coaching. But I'm still actively involved in climate work through the Climate Reality Project and doing that more so in the community spaces. So the reason that I got involved with CANIE was primarily because of these two spaces. The Content and Resource Library Working Group is a space that's all about resources, free resources for people within the international education field. And the Climate Justice Working Group is all about how we can center what we do from the lens of justice. So I like the idea so much, especially when you think about justice, of making things equitable. And one of the ways to do that is make everyone have this kind of level playing field of access. And so that's what really drew me to have an interest in the resource library. One of the things that I think is really amazing about the resource library space is that if you're on that working group, you have first look at what's happening, what kind of information is being kind of shared throughout our sector. The part about the resource library that can sometimes be a little daunting as far as finding people to get involved is, unlike some of the wonderful names that you see on this list, this one is maybe the one that has the least excitement behind it typically for the average person. It is more of a organizational piece. It is something that needs to get done. We need to get the behind the scenes work done so we can get it out on this beautiful website and have it looking good and have it available and have it searchable, have it, you can favorite things, all kinds of things you can do on this website because of CJ and the crew that got behind that. But we need to get that work done. And that includes everything from navigating the submission process, which has already been mapped out, so you don't have to even figure it out anymore. The rubric of reviewing things, and that's also been mapped out. And then actually getting through the content, reviewing it, and deciding based on some criteria that have been set out too, which ones can go to the website and which ones do not. And is there another space for this stuff that maybe doesn't make it to the website, but maybe can be shared in some other way through Slack or through a newsletter or something else? So that's the process. The process is laid out. Now we just need people who are interested in getting behind that process. And there's also a space, I would say, because every time there's a new team, to review what's in place and see if it needs to be amended in any way. So that's a little bit about that. If you'd like to know more, the email that they mentioned right down there is a great place. And I'm also on Slack spaces. So if anyone wants to reach out to me directly for the CANIE Slack, I'm more than happy to talk to you and continue to talk about this. Now with the climate justice, I'd say if you think about historically how, let's say, big environmental groups have been navigating the climate action spaces, just over these last 3-4 years now, it's been really clear that people have been approaching it in more of a earth first kind of process, less of a human or people oriented place, and definitely in the space of addressing, how climate impacts can impact people with disproportionate impacts. There wasn't really an emphasis on that. It was kind of like well, we have to fix the earth first before we can kind of get to these other problems. And people started to realize, that is not a good way to go about climate action. We have to go about climate action through the lens of justice. We have to address these things at a parallel space because if they are impacting people disproportionately, it means that even though people started out talking about this as a future, hey, the climate thing's going to impact us, there are plenty of people who were already feeling it and they just weren't at the table. They were not given a space and a platform to speak, or they were not being listened to straight up. So CANIE wanted to make sure that we always have a platform and space to keep this in the front of our minds. And the working group is a great place for that. I'm one of the co-chairs for that. And one of the things I love most about this group is it is a very safe space to discuss things, whether we're not sure about something, whether we have very strong opinions about something. We all feel, and we've talked about this as a group, we all feel really safe to bring things up in this space. And we'd like to see that be something that we can see in every group for all CANIE. So that's part of, we've created some guidelines actually to help create those kinds of spaces as part of our climate justice working group. So that's just a little bit about it. The way it works as far as what we focus on, it's really driven by whoever's part of the group. So we've done everything from start out with introducing people to what is climate justice, to creating things like offsetting. Is it a good idea or not? So all kinds of things. And if you become part of that, we'll look also then of what you're interested in and what might be at the forefront within the sector to bring to the table for people in CANIE to think about as far as justice and climate action. All right, that's about it.
All right, and then I'll wrap it up super quickly with just reviewing the last 3 working groups. The Greening Conferences working group is the newest of all these working groups, and we are still shaping out a little bit what that's going to entail and exactly how we know for sure that it involves travel with CANIE. So you might have seen that in Europe, and we want to bring travel with CANIE to the Americas where possible. Obviously, it's a totally different game, but we do want to bring travel with CANIE to and that like social element of it to events that happen in the Americas where possible. And then we are looking at different ways to support conference providers and conference attendees to sort of be as climate conscious and centering sort of those justice elements when making those decisions. And then the fundraising group, that's a big one because it's super important to what CANIE does, because it helps keep the lights on, because everybody who works at CANIE is pretty much volunteering their time, and that's a really important piece, seeking out sponsors, whether it's for the podcast or Climate Action Week or different, parts, different events that we might host, or so still figuring out what that might look like. We have a donation button on the website that we still want to, and that brings in donations, which is super fantastic, but also how can we sort of make more of that? And then last but not least, you may or may not have heard about the CANIE Accord. It is our signature program to support the sector. It's really our sector's response to the climate crisis, and it is for international education practitioners by international education practitioners. It came to be a little over 2 years ago when the Leaders Forum at the CANIE Climate Action Week in 2021 or 2020 put things in action. 2021, my apologies. So it was in 2021, the Climate Action Week, we invited leaders from all over the world in the sector to figure out what CANIE could best do to help. And what was requested was a framework in order to implement some action. And that is done in a series of commitments. And so what we are looking for in CANIE Accord Accelerator would be people who are willing to talk to institutions, organizations, associations about signing on to the CANIE Accord. There's perfect. Anna just dropped in the chat a previous CANIE Accord Climate Action Week session, which is really awesome. And then the CANIE Accord document, which is really just a framework that you can use and sign on to as public commitment to what you can do. And so really we want to scope that out as big as possible. So that's a look at all the different ways in which you who are here today, if you're not already involved, can get more involved. And we would definitely encourage you. You can message Sebastian and I over the course of this session if you like. You can email the Americas below, but we definitely hope to see you beyond this session and grow the chapter in the Americas, grow the working groups globally, to sort of move this forward and towards that mission of net zero by 2030.
That's the goal. Thank you, CJ. Thank you, Ine, for explaining the working group. So as for everybody new here, there's plenty of opportunities for you to get involved with what CANIE is doing. And if you would like not to get involved, but still network and be part of our meetings, we do host our Americas chapter regional meeting every month. It's usually the second Monday of every month. So next meetings will be on May the 8th, June the 12th, and so on. We, of course, keep moving some of them because of holidays and so on. Like today is our meeting for this month. And in the past year, in our meetings, we have been doing from quizzes and games, learning from good examples. Our colleague Amy did a fantastic climate action Venn diagram. And most importantly, we also network within the Americas. Mostly the chapter entails US and Canada, but also we want to welcome everybody in the Americas from top to down here south, where am I? Also, during past year, we had some great examples because I believe that's a big important part of having some good leadership on what's being done within our sector. And in that, we had Suzanne, in the next slide, we had Suzanne from Temple University, chapter member, that was explaining to us all the different actions and different changes that were introduced into Temple University International Education Department, and also some within the university itself, with students, with leadership, leading to climate action, and that was excellent. We also had Emily on a very unique program in the United World Schools in Canada, and we had Johan giving a master class at one of our sessions on what they are doing at the which is simply fantastic, and I cannot explain it in just a few words, but I remember we do have that session recording, so if you're interested, I can send you the recording on everything that they have been doing within the sector, and also regenerating land and so on. So now today at our meeting, we wanted to open a discussion section where we want to talk exactly about influence. This came a little bit by chance. We were talking with CJ, and we came to see some different points of view on a specific topic that we wanted to bring to this discussion, and also then open the microphones and having everybody share your ideas, your opinions, and what has been done. But the goal here, we have basically two goals with this title, Making the Most of Your Influence in International Education, is understanding the power dynamics and understanding how we can influence. If you can go to the next slide, Joe. Zachary, yeah, great. So the goal is basically to understand how we as practitioners, everybody here, we mostly work for an institution, or we are affiliated with an institution, and we have a job there to do. So how our job can influence the sector within our own institution, and then how we can leverage our personal influence within our institution, because not everybody here within different levels, within different sectors, can influence in that way. And to start that, I will be giving an example. I'm sorry to be self-referenced, but this is how the conversation started with CJ. And CJ, not sure if you want to explain it from my side, or you prefer me to.
Let's see how this goes. I think that one of the things that is important is everyone in this room today has a sphere of influence, right? At work, in the sector, everyone has a sphere of influence. And it may be the case that we think we have to have more influence than is necessary, or we don't maybe understand the influence that we have. And so the reason we're having this conversation today is because I sort of poked at Sebastian, because Sebastian, you are sort of head of operations at FPP. which is a signatory of the CANIE Accord, and offering, maybe what you can tell us a little bit when you go into this, but offering student fairs where you are connecting students with institutions as part of the recruitment process, and when students are making those decisions. And as we all learned, that could be done virtually in the face of COVID. We learned a lot, transformed so much. FPP responded and went fully virtual, and then made an announcement that you were going to do that work and remain fully virtual. And then, you're a signatory of the CANIE Accord, and so FPP reverted back to doing in-person fairs after making that commitment. And I was like, hey, Sebastian, tell me a bit more about that, and sort of, which brought us to that conversation today. So I'm hoping that you can share a little bit about the decision to go virtual, and then the decision to go back, because as a service provider, you have a tremendous amount of influence, and that influence was used to sort of focus on more climate conscious events, and sort of the flip back, wanting to understand where that came from and sort of what influenced that decision.
It's exactly that, CJ, that you were explaining. So long story short, what I do, I lead a team of 50 people that in a company that I just take care of the operations. I don't lead the whole company, but the operations of that means that we need to run events in order to connect institutions and students. And we have been doing that for 20 years. When the pandemic hit, we were already prepared doing virtual events since 2012. So we had been doing that for many years. And when the pandemic hit, we kind of understood that, hey, the future is here. If students are doing everything online, everything on their phones, why choosing a university overseas be different? That they're connecting online with friends, they're choosing to see Netflix and not renting a movie, whatever. They're not calling a taxi, they're using Uber. Why would it be different if they do everything virtually? And that's how we took the decision of, hey, virtual is better for the environment. You cut on cost, you do this, you do that. So it had a lot of advantages. Yes, you have the only disadvantage that you don't have the face-to-face contact, but still institutions during the pandemic, without traveling and so on, they still recruited students. So everything was business as usual in a way, even though they had to radically and fastly transform. Things continue to happen. Actually, many institutions in Canada and the US even had more numbers than in the past. So 2.5 years later.
Okay, tell me more about why you went back then.
Yeah, so 2.5 years later, we found ourselves with basically our main influencer, which was our clients, telling us, we want in person, we want in person, we want in person. And when you hear that from one person, 2, 3, that's fine. But when you hear that from everybody, or mostly everybody, and just a few saying, no, virtual is great, I'm going to stick to virtual. It's like everybody saying, no, we want to go back in person. It's like, well, that's how the influence from the sector influenced, in our case, a service provider, to go back in our decision, even though it was, we still believe it's better. So what we did was try to blend what our vision for the future with our vision for the present, but that definitely had a big of this point that I am leveraging here. It's like understanding how we influence the sector on the way that we do our job. It's influencing climate action within other companies or other providers within the sector.
Okay, so thank you. So despite your best efforts, you were hearing, we want in person. And now, okay, I don't know that I told you I was going to ask you this question or if we talked about it, but I'm asking it anyway. And one of the things is you said, we want in person. Can you can you share a little, we're all friends here, about the driver for that? Because I'm not hearing your virtual fairs weren't effective, because you're talking about how like the numbers of students recruited, like it was back to normal. There was an ISEP article earlier, late in 2022 that said like in numbers in Canada we're at like 93% of what they were before without anyone on the road. So I'm sort of keen to hear any dig into that, like we want in person a bit more.
I'm exactly today I got an email from someone who had been doing virtual fairs with us for a couple of years, and basically it says that as the pandemic is over, we're going to go back full in person. So it's exactly that. It's like during the pandemic, okay, we were doing it okay with virtual because it was the last resource and there was nothing else. And our mindset in that was like, hey, we're forgetting about the main client here, which is the students. It's not us. It's not the institutions. The main client here is the students, and students have changed their ways. And even though the pandemic is over, students are evolving. They're not they're not going backwards. So it's exactly that point when you listen to the same message from several people. It's like, well, we need to change, even though we wanted to change in a more sustainable direction. When you have everybody telling you, no, you need to go back in person, we need to listen as well.
Okay. And I guess I'm going to say the thing that we may all be thinking, or I know some of us because I know some people in this room are thinking, is that doesn't sound like it's coming from a student first approach. It does very much sound like this is a lot of people in the sector who, myself included, came to the sector, or when we were recruited into the sector or grew into the sector, saw travel as sort of a great opportunity, and maybe over time came to be sort of the standard or entitlement to that way of life. How much, I'm not going to make you sort of say anything, but I'm wondering if anyone in the chat sees a different reason, because I'm not hearing anything. And I think the fundamental truth is that the job has changed in the age of like people being on their phones. Recruitment does tend to be a lot more digital now, and to like take advantage of that. That's not the same training as it was from a recruitment mindset in the before times. And I'm wondering how much of that in your sense is just people not wanting to change or wanting to keep traveling.
No, CJ, is one point that I didn't mention that we did say that along the process, and I still believe that it's not that we were against travel when we went back to 100% in virtual. We were against, we were on favor of meaningful travel, because usually, at least in the recruitment sector, the fairs and so on, most of the travel was just to meet a student for the first time. And you just travel 10 hours all the way to India to get into a hotel room and chat with a student that has never heard about your institution for the very first time ever. It's like, why don't you travel to India? It's like, I'm not saying don't travel, but don't travel 3 times a year. Travel once a year down the funnel, where you can meet with students that you probably maybe engaged before online and that may know more about your institution, and you can meet partners in person, you can meet other institutions, and it's like, so you don't cut the travel, you can't so much travel, but you just cut, and when you travel, you do it more meaningful rather than just the travel for the travel. But yeah.
And I will even go so far as to say, like, personally, I know that we talk a lot about having like a justice mindset, whereas like if you're going to be recruiting from a country, like there's something to be said for having staff more locally, or like not necessarily having to travel from the home of the institution. So what I just want to like, what I got from this, which led to this conversation, is that I mean, I'm assuming you're not talking to university presidents. I'm assuming you're not talking to, the people who are deciding on where they want to work, or who are signing off on. My assumption here is that you're dealing with the highest levels of the organization, but that this is a choice that people who are signing off on a recruitment plan, or who are proposing a recruitment plan, for a specific year or even like part of a strategy. I do think that there's something to be said for understanding that your influence as a personal want to like do things this way has an impact, right? We talk about like, and I know we talked about this, but when in my previous job, I've been a sponsor as a service provider, to be a sponsor for events for the last 10 years before I started Alethea. And so I had a limited scope of what I could do but what I could do, I did, right? When it came to deciding where I was going to travel and how I was going to sponsor events, one of the last things we looked at sponsoring. And I think Zach in here has an example of this as well, sort of taking a sponsorship, you know, in this day and age, we're sponsoring lanyards and like swag bags, and like we have a tremendous amount of power as a sponsor to sort of steer conference providers. And that's my limited scope of what I can influence. And so I'd be keen to hear other people in this space. There's some really interesting conversation happening on this in the chat, and I would invite anyone at this point to sort of add to that or share, talk about like the sphere of what you can influence, or if Zach, I don't know if Zach is able to connect with us right now in chat, but really talk about our ability to like influence as sponsors, or whether we attend events, or what providers that we're working with in the recruitment journey, and what that looks like.
Yeah, CJ, we went ahead and sponsored public transportation tickets at the forum in Seattle this year, and our goal was to find a way to provide a sponsorship that was additive towards our mission, as opposed to kind of additive in a different way, right? Additive into the kind of the world of swag and the world of tchotchkes and things that kind of are designed to be thrown away within 1 to 3 years and are designed to be disposable in a way. And so our goal was just to try to include ICEP's name in this mission to get folks to be making responsible choices on a one-off basis during their travels. And, you know, little changes can make a big difference. And it took some finagling with the forum to kind of agree to that sponsorship, but we got into a good space with them, and ultimately we're able to sponsor about 350 light rail passes from the conference back to the airport. So while it's not the same as, let's say, not having those folks travel at all, you know, using flight, it did make a difference, hopefully, with people realizing that public transportation as part of professional travel is something that's doable, is something that you can do more regularly and have a big impact if we scale that up across the entire conference, for example. So we're hoping to be replicating that, and I hope it's just the beginning. And quite frankly, I hope we get priced out, because we're a small nonprofit. I hope the big boys start coming in and throwing lots of money at this, and it would be great to see sponsorship be more seen as a way for us to make the conferences more green, as opposed to a way for folks just to get a bunch of, like you said, lanyards and tote bags and water bottles and things like this, which we all have piling up in our homes after going to a few conferences at a certain point. So it was a good experience, and we hope to keep moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Zach. Sorry, go ahead, Sebastian.
No, that's simply awesome, and that's exactly what we want others to tell us here today. But before a disclaimer for maybe those of you who are new to CANIE and new to, why do we focus that much in travel? Because within the emissions of our sector within international education, of course, we don't want to stop students from traveling, but the travel, especially air travel, is what contributes the most to emissions. So just making that clear for anyone joining us here for the first time and saying why these folks are so obsessed about travel. It's like, well, that's the biggest emission within our sector, and it's one of the ones that I believe we need to cut. And what just Zach explained in a conference, like replace 350 people taking a train back to the airport. That's considerable amount of emissions that were saved on one nice sponsorship rather than a lanyard.
No, that's awesome. So I think maybe we wanted to break out into a few different rooms to hear about how people might be able to influence within their own organization. But if there's, I just want to like recognize the chat as a lot of really interesting stuff around virtual exchange. And I think that was a huge topic of conversation in the podcast COIL. There's now research that shows that COIL like empirically does transform students into developing cultural competencies. So I think what we're gonna do is we're just gonna break out the breakout rooms and have everyone, I think what we might do is see who's more interested, and once you get into a breakout room, what we want to talk about of those 3 questions.
Right. Yeah, Zach, if you can show the 3 questions before we go into breakout rooms.
Yeah, and they're all in the chat also as well, just in case Claire just dropped them there.
Yeah, that one.
So I think that ending in the breakout room is probably a good piece. We'll have 15 minutes and then we can come back. Sebastian, does that work for you?
I would say 10 minutes and we come back for the final. We just have 15 minutes left. So let's do 10 minutes in the breakout rooms and we come back for 5 minutes just to say goodbye and see you soon. Very quick one, upcoming meetings. As I said, they happen every second Monday of the month. And they will be on Google Meets. So today, because this one is Climate Action Week, it's on Zoom, but otherwise we do it on Google Meets. And if you have anyone that would like to join, we have a link. Otherwise, you can reach out to me. Last thing about the podcast, as CJ explained, that's excellent. We have 3 very nice episodes, and there's a meeting in 2 weeks on May the 2nd if you want to join them. So you can write to Kelly about that if you need. Her contact details are going to be right there in the screen. And that's it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining. And CJ, not sure if you have anything to add.
No, just I hope to see everyone join these again in the future. I think that there's it's a big problem to solve, and it's going to take some collective action and perseverance and using our influence to as much as possible, really making the most of it to move some of these things forward. Because I did hear there's a lot of talk around like barriers and implementation problems and lots of great ideas. But like, how do we go ahead and sort of move those forward? Yeah. That's what we're here for. And a big thank you again to Miwish to organizing this Climate Action Week and to all the volunteers that are here with us today. Thank you very much for your time and your effort contributing to Climate Action Week. And thanks to you, CJ, on sponsoring this and also on helping on today's session with your thoughts. So thank you again, everybody, for joining. We'll be in contact if you need anything, americas@canie.org.